Angelus Temple, and people liked what they saw. People are being saved. God is working in their lives. But at that point, it was hard to get here. It was the 1920s. Not even everybody had cars. They could take the trolley to get here. So they said, we're coming 20 miles to see your services. Can we have a church near us? So they started planting other churches so people didn't have to travel so far. And there got to be so many churches, they had to be some organization to it all, and so they started the denomination, which is called Foursquare. That's why the denomination started. It was not her plan to be a pastor and to lead a denomination, but God was working so mightily and so many churches were being started, you had to have an organization just to help all the pastors get trained and handle the finances and that sort of thing. So the denomination called Foursquare was started. Foursquare, by the way, if you don't know, Foursquare 100 years ago meant complete. That's what it meant. So if you had a Foursquare gospel, that meant you have the complete gospel. Jesus is Savior, healer, baptizer, and soon coming King. And you could be any denomination and be a Foursquare pastor, in that there were signs that would say, the Baptist Church, we preach the Foursquare gospel. The Methodist Church, down the street, we preach the Foursquare gospel. It just meant we preach the whole gospel. And that's what Foursquare is, preaching the whole gospel to minister all of what man needs. And so that's what Foursquare is. So she started that, the denomination started growing, and now we have many more people around the world than we do in the United States. But Amy was always focused on reaching the world for Jesus and reaching the other countries for Jesus. So she came here, again started the church, and it grew. And when we had in the United States, it was called the Depression in the 1930s, and people didn't work. There just was not a lot of work. People were starving. And the government set up a system whereas if you were hungry, you could go to the government to get food. But what the government said is, unless you can prove that you've lived here for 3 months or 6 months, we're not going to give you any food. Aimee Semple McPherson said, if you're hungry, knock on my door, I'll give you food. And the Spanish community in Los Angeles especially had a hard time, because many of them could not prove that they had lived here for long enough for the government to help them. But you knock on the door here at Angelus Temple, say, I need food, my kids are hungry. She would say, here's food. And because they got food, they got cared for, they got loved, they got prayed for. Then they would come to Angelus Temple and they'd hear the gospel, and then they'd get to know the Savior. So they'd get the spiritual food that they needed. But it was through helping people in the community that people came here. And over 1.5 million people were fed and clothed by this one church. 1.5 million. And everybody in the congregation had a ministry. They had something to do. You could work taking care of, if people were dying, there was a ministry for people to go and be with them, hospice care, to care for people who were dying. If you had a baby and your husband didn't know how to cook, there was a ministry to go to your house and provide you with food while you were recuperating from having a baby. There were dozens and dozens of ministries, and everybody who came had a ministry to do. And again, that reached thousands and thousands of people who then came to Angelus Temple and got to know Jesus as Savior. One of the famous stories about her was her kidnapping. She was actually kidnapped 3 times. They thought that they could get money by kidnapping her and holding her for ransom. So she was kidnapped, but she escaped. Yay! So she escaped and came back, and because the newspapers had written so much about the kidnapping, she was now even more famous. And now her sermons were being published in newspapers across the United States on Sundays. I can't remember the exact number, but I think it was over 1,000 newspapers every Sunday were printing her sermons. And so people who never even went into a church were reading her sermons about Jesus, the Savior. So again, use whatever door God opened to reach people for Jesus.